Hi, I'm Lisa O'Connor. We've been typing back and forth on the discussion board, but here I am. For my final project, the subject is writing materials and letters from Jane Austen's time. What would she have used? What would she not have used that we have seen in some of the films? This is my writing box. It is not an antique, this is new. But in it is what the personal belongings of the letter writer would have been kept in. A desk would have been probably too expensive. This is a home box. There is no latch and there is no lock. It would have stationery or blank books. It would have the shaker for pounce. An inkwell or an ink bottle would have been stored inside. We have a seal and sealing wax. They also would have used gum seals, which are something we'll discuss later. Our pen knife for cutting our feathers. A blank that hasn't been even tempered yet. These are slanted to keep your pens from rolling. We have a spot to hold ink should you be carrying it around the house. And it is all nice, neat, and tidy. So this is our toy box unpacked. The pens that Jane Austen would have been using would be most likely goose quill. England produced millions of these on their own, but they liked to import them from colder weather climates because it was supposed to make the tips firmer. They would get them from Holland, from Greenland, Iceland, possibly Ireland. Unfortunately for the geese of Hudson Bay, who had spectacular black feathers, those became very popular as well. The feathers would normally be goose, but turkey could be used, pheasant, swans, crows, which had very fine points, were used. They were supposed to be better for women to use. They made a tiny script, and it was an elegant writing. There is writings from the medieval that say even pelican and peacock feathers were used. Now this is raw. It would not have come this way unless you picked it from your own goose. This would come in and they would strip it, and this really is the easy part. It just peels down the side and you scrape off the extra. Once the feather and the shaft has been stripped, they would bake it. That's not something that's recommended for a modern oven because our heat element is inside the box. So I used a soup can, heated the sand to 350 degrees, and then stuck the feathers into it, and you allow it to cool until it is cold on the outside so you know that there's no residual heat. The feathers come out, they get dusted, they get polished, and they're ready to ship. In the 1999 Miramax Mansfield Park, we saw Fanny using a metal nibbed pen. Steel nibs were available in limited amounts. They were fairly rough and people didn't like them. They weren't machine made until about 15-20 years after Jane Austen's death, so she would not have been using them. However, we see Fanny using one that would not have been available yet unless she was very, very wealthy. In the book Pride and Prejudice, we hear a reference to Miss Bingley kindly offering to mend the pen of Mr. Darcy. He was writing with a feather, so if his wealth comparably wasn't enough to be purchasing metal nibs for his pen, we're pretty sure that Jane Austen wasn't. The directions for cutting the tip of the pen are deceptively simple. I've been practicing and this is the best I have come up with so far. It is ragged and torn. The idea is you have a nice sharp little knife. This is a pen knife. We know that because it's a narrow blade. It is slightly curved at the tip. It can fit inside the cut shaft to clean out the little whorls that are in there. The idea is you hold it at a 45-degree angle and just cut. And there we still have the same ragged tip. The shaft can crack, it can break, which this one has. It's not going to produce a good point no matter how I cut it. So we get another. And here we go. Again. No. If you can get a nice angle, which this isn't a nice angle, You then cut from the side and from the other side. The idea is scooping out till you get a point, which then gets trimmed off flat. So our next topic is ink. This is an inkwell. This is a home inkwell because the top is a flip top. Nothing's threaded, nothing's corked or secure. Ink's history is a little unclear. We know that the Egyptians used it, and we know that the Chinese have had it in a solid form for centuries, longer than anyone else. But there's not much documentation of when did it start. Ink everywhere had the same general base. It was the soot of a very resinous wood. It's burned. You collect the ashes, you mix it with some liquid. You've got a cake of it, a stick of it, you let it dry. That would be ground and mixed with water, and you have your ink. We have our moderately functioning tip on the feather, and all you do is dip and write. For writing, the proper form was to tuck your ring finger and your pinky up against your palm. You only use your index and middle finger and thumb, and produce something hopefully that is better looking than what I have on my page at the moment. So we have too much ink for our paper to take in, which is where we come to Pounce. This is a make-do shaker. Pounce, in this case, is very fine sand. Sprinkle it on. It soaks up the excess ink that won't be absorbed into the paper, and you shake it off. Paper. Paper in Jane Austen's time was cotton rag. Cotton rag left unpressed and unsized would be about as absorbent as a paper towel. So this would be dipped into vats of a gelatin substance. It would be relatively like glue that seals the fibers. Those would then be hung to dry, which is where we get our crease, and then polished by hand to give you a nice smooth writing surface. It would come in blank books. We saw a good shot of Cousin Edmund trimming for Fanny a sheet of paper out of a book of blanks. They would have been larger pages than this, but smaller pages would be cut from them. The French had experimented with some mechanizing of the process. When Miss Bingley sends her letter of departure to Jane in Pride and Prejudice, there's a comment made that it is a neat little piece of hot pressed paper, which could be a dig that Miss Bingley is getting her paper from the French. The heated cylinders to press paper weren't patented in England until about 10-15 years after Jane Austen's death. They would have known it was available, but it wasn't widely produced, and it wasn't produced in country. So could be a comment as to the wealth of the Bingleys or to the pretensions of Miss Bingley. When you got it, it had been folded and it had been fairly creased, so you ended up with 4 pages in this little notebook. The center of the back would have been left bare for the address to be put on, and the rest would have been written in. There were specific rules as to how you wrote and who you wrote to. If you were writing to someone of a significantly higher rank than yourself, the salutation goes on the top. You go 4 fingers width down and begin the body of your message. You could write on this as the first page, the second, and the third. If you were writing to someone such as the Queen, you would address it to your Royal Majesty and then write nothing until 2 fingers from the bottom. This is where the letter begins. You never write on page 2, and you do finish at least halfway from the bottom of page 3. If you can finish closer to the top, it's even better.